Subcommittee will come to order. Ranking Member Wicker, colleagues and guests, welcome to the first hearing of the Subcommittee on Chemical Safety, Waste Management, Environmental Justice, and Regulatory Oversight in the 117th Congress. Today's hearing will explore critical issues of environmental justice and adverse impacts on at-risk communities. It's fitting that these important issues are the subject for our first hearing, as just earlier this year, the term environmental justice was added to the name of the subcommittee, highlighting the growing awareness of and public conversation around environmental justice in America. As climate change ravages our country and our planet, from the 80 fires burning across 13 states, the biggest, the bootleg fire in my home state of Oregon, coastal communities confronting flooding, ever more frequent, powerful, destructive storms, we cannot ignore the fact that while we all feel its effects, the worst consequences of pollution and the ravages of climate chaos disproportionately fall on communities of color and communities with the fewest resources for either adapting or recovering. Frontline communities, low-wealth communities, indigenous communities, communities of color, not only are they more prone to experiencing extreme weather events, but they also face greater health burdens such as asthma and lead poisoning, along with higher rates of heart-related illnesses and deaths. Oftentimes, these impacts are the direct result of decisions and discriminatory policies. Decisions like where to place a landfill, or where to place a factory, location of toxic waste dumps, oil refineries, chemical companies, where water infrastructure projects are prioritized and where they are ignored, where green spaces are created and where they are not created. But while advocates and concerned citizens have been highlighting these injustices for decades, for far too long the costs of these decisions and policies have been ignored. Unfortunately, fortunately, that has been changing, to the point that today we are engaged in an overdue national conversation about environmental justice and the well-being of all of our communities. Over the past 7 months, I've been pleased to see the Biden administration actively engaged at the forefront of this conversation. The President's executive order directing 40% of the administration's climate and clean energy investments to disadvantaged communities will not only bring much-needed resources to bear on cleaning up pollution and delivering clean water infrastructure, it will begin to course-correct for decades of persistent injustice endured by these communities. Beyond that, the administration has continued to demonstrate its commitment to environmental justice through the work of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Made up of a wide range of leaders on the issue, the Council is making contributions to guiding the President's environmental justice efforts through the recommendations contained within its landmark report. Like the renaming of the subcommittee and today's hearings, the White House's ongoing efforts to address environmental injustice are significant signs that progress is being made. Yet, despite growing attention, one has to only look at the disparate impact of the heat wave out west, or of the wildfires burning up rural communities, or the outsized impact of COVID, to know that we have barely begun to address environmental injustice. That's why we are fortunate today to have leading voices in this critical and growing national conversation to talk about issues and challenges. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for being with us today. Each of you brings a unique voice, a unique set of experiences to this dialogue. And in the pursuit of environmental justice, we need to uplift and listen to every voice, especially those who have historically not had a seat at the table. We'll only succeed in eliminating injustices when all communities are listened to and when we commit ourselves to addressing the challenges raised. I'd like to now turn to my ranking member, Senator Wicker, for any remarks he would like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this hearing. It's a very important topic. I welcome our witnesses today as the subcommittee considers issues affecting environmental justice populations. To begin with, I think we should define what we mean by environmental justice, and I think really a better topic, and you might agree, Mr. Chair, is environmental injustice, because it's those populations that you're talking about who are experiencing an injustice. Although federal law gives no official definition to the term, it typically refers to situations in which adverse health or environmental impacts fall disproportionately on minority or low-income populations. There has been a growing recognition of the need to address environmental justice in recent years. The Flint water crisis in Michigan comes to mind as a major example. But not all cases of environmental injustice receive the same attention. One prominent example is in my state of Mississippi, where residents of the South Delta have long suffered repeated flooding from the Mississippi River. The South Delta has a predominantly minority population and faces unique economic challenges, which are made worse by the recurrence of flooding. This region has flooded in 8 out of the last 10 years, the most recent being this year, when nearly 300,000 acres were inundated. Flooding was even worse in 2019, when over 500,000 acres went underwater for months. Water overtopped roads, closed 3 highways, kept many residents from leaving their homes. 231,000 acres of cropland were flooded, destroying livelihoods in a region where agriculture is the main economic driver. Wildlife was forced to flee to high ground. 686 homes were flooded, 686 families, and 2 people were tragically killed. According to one study from Mississippi State University, the 2019 backwater flood resulted in residents spending on average more than $42,000 in out-of-pocket expenses. Can you imagine? People were forced to build levees around their property to keep the floodwaters from encroaching all around them. These are costs that many residents simply cannot afford. In 5 of the 6 counties of the South Delta, roughly 1/3 of the population lives in poverty. For years, residents have moved away because of the continuing flood risk. As populations decline, the community fabric has frayed, leaving many behind who have nowhere else to go. Regular flooding reinforces this cycle of poverty because residents lack the certainty they need to build homes and establish new businesses. The real tragedy, though, is that these floods are entirely preventable. In 1941, 80 years ago, Congress made a promise to the people living along the Mississippi River. That promise was the Mississippi Rivers and Tributaries System, which includes a series of levees, flood control structures, and pumps to remove excess rainwater trapped by the levees from the residential areas and farmland. Over the years, this system has been built up and down the Mississippi River, with one major exception. The Yazoo backwater pumps have never been completed. The system has been completed everywhere else. Of the 4 backwater areas along the Mississippi, the Yazoo backwater area is the only one missing backwater pumps. If we are here to discuss environmental injustice, I would suggest that the residents of the South Delta face one of the most glaring instances of environmental injustice anywhere in the nation. The good news, though, is that today there is a viable project to remedy this situation. For years, I've worked with local stakeholders, Army Corps of Engineers, and federal officials to get these pumps finally built. And earlier this year, the Army Corps finally issued a record of decision in favor of the pump project, a milestone that brings it closer to final construction. And I'm happy to say, Mr. Chairman and ladies and gentlemen, that this plan is a win for animal life, for plant life, and for human life. There's no doubt this proposal would have positive impacts on minority and low-income communities. South Delta homes and businesses would enjoy a hedge of protection, allowing for greater economic development to take hold. The proposal would improve aquatic and wildlife conditions, water quality, and it would improve the environment. And nearly 2,500 acres of cropland would be reforested, providing quality habitats for many fish and wildlife. The science and the economics finally all line up in support of the backwater pumps. As this project shows, there are communities across the nation that need true physical infrastructure to remedy cases of environmental injustice. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We will now introduce our witnesses. I'll introduce the first two, and Senator Wicker, I believe we're going to introduce Ms. Harden, and Senator Sullivan will introduce Delba Jrexford. Professor Laura Polito will be joining us online from the University of Oregon. She has been on the front lines of expanding the school's environmental justice efforts. She is the Collins Chair and Professor of Indigenous, Race, and Ethnic Studies and Geography, as well as a leading scholar in the field of environmental justice. Back in January, she was part of the team that received a grant to establish the Pacific Northwest Just Futures Institute for Racial and Climate Justice, which seeks to tackle the intertwined issues of racial and climate justice and work toward a more just future for our region, as well as increase access to higher education for historically underrepresented communities. Professor Polito has published 6 books in her field, received numerous honors for her work, including the Presidential Achievement Award from the Association of American Geographers, the Coleman Geographical Medal from the American Geographic Society, and Ford and Guggenheim Fellowships. And Catherine Coleman Flowers is the founding director of the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice. She is also the current co-vice chair of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Ms. Flowers is an internationally recognized environmental activist, MacArthur Genius Grant as recipient and author. Ms. Flowers serves as the Rural Development Manager for Brian Stevenson's Equal Justice Initiative, is a board member for the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary, and sits on the board of directors for the Climate Reality Project and the Natural Resources Defense Council. Thank you to both of them for joining us today, and we'll now turn the microphone over to Senator Wicker.
Thank you again, Senator Merkley. I'm honored to introduce Mrs. Tracy Harden from the state of Mississippi. Mrs. Harden is a lifelong resident of the South Delta. She owns Chuck's Dairy Bar, a fixture in the Rolling Fork community, known for its Chuck burgers and milkshakes. Tracy and her husband, Tim, who is with us today in the audience, purchased Chuck's in 2006. Tracy's been successfully operating it since then. Chuck's patrons include farmers and farm workers and sportsmen, particularly hunters who travel to the South Delta during hunting season. Tracy's business has suffered during the pandemic, but as she will tell you today, her business was far more impacted by the 2019 flood in the South Delta. Every day, she witnesses the heavy costs that have come from government delay in building the Yazoo backwater pumps. She has firsthand experience with many of the issues we will discuss, and I appreciate her traveling to Washington, D.C. and appearing before the subcommittee. Thank you, sir.
Great. Senator Sullivan.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Wicker for holding this hearing. I'm honored to introduce a truly great Alaskan leader, Delba Jrexford, who certainly will get the award for traveling the furthest for this hearing, coming from Utqiagvik, Alaska. That's the top of the world, the northernmost community in North America. We're looking up the miles. It's maybe about 4,000 miles from D.C. So, Mr. Jrexford, thank you, sir, for being here. Great to see you. His experience in community service includes lay pastor at the Utqiagvik Presbyterian Church, City of Barrow councilman for 7 years, North Slope Borough assemblyman for 6 years, Alaska Municipal League director and president, UIC Board of Directors and Construction Director, Executive Director, Gates of the Arctic National Park Subsistence Commission member, and the Native Village of Barrow Tribal Council, just to name a few. He's also a member of the Inuit Circumpolar Council General Assembly, where he focused on contaminants and pollutants in the high Arctic polar regions. Mr. Jrexford learned to read and write English by a seal oil lamp. Mr. Jrexford is a great Alaskan Native leader, as I mentioned, from Utqiagvik, the most northern community in all of North America, one of my favorite places in the world, in Alaska, and if you haven't been, you should go. It's an amazing place with wonderful people. A great time to go is during the celebrations following the spring and fall whaling seasons. We still do whaling hunts, legal whaling hunts. Our Native people have been doing that for thousands of years. Americans still do that. It's incredible. And you can see for yourself how the residents there have kept their cultural heritage not only alive, but thriving due to leaders like Mr. Jrexford. You will no doubt hear from Mr. Jrexford that this has not always been easy, largely because of actions and inactions of the federal government. He will discuss today the contamination of federal lands conveyed to the Alaska Native people that were all polluted. Unbelievable. And the feds need to clean it up. It's an ongoing struggle to clean up these lands. It's a long past time to right this wrong. Mr. Jrexford has also spoken about the frustration he and so many Alaska Natives feel about their ability to have an economy that, yes, is based on resource development, and the proceeds that Alaska Natives receive from oil and gas and mining in Alaska on state, tribal, Native, and federal lands. Natural resources on the North Slope of Alaska have been a lifeline, literally a lifeline for Utiavik and communities across my state. Unfortunately, this administration, some of their extreme environmental allies, are constantly trying to shut down the resource development in Alaska that has been so vital for the health and well-being of the Alaska Native people. As the mayor of the North Slope Borough and another exceptional Inupiaq leader, Harry Brower, so eloquently wrote in the Wall Street Journal recently, quote, "We treasure and protect our land and wildlife, the resources that executives and environmental groups in cities thousands of miles away from Alaska claim to care about. The way we see it, caring about the land and wildlife should also mean caring about the indigenous people who live in these communities." I'm sure Mr. Jrexford would agree, and I very much look forward to his testimony. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing.
Thank you very much, Senator Sullivan. Now we get to hear from the witnesses themselves, and we'll turn first to Laura Polito. Through
Chair
online
Merkley,
magic.
can y'all hear me okay?
We can now hear you and we can see you. Thank you and welcome.
Chair Merkley, Ranking Member Wicker, and members of the committee. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on environmental justice. I'm delighted that the Environment and Public Works Subcommittee on Chemical Safety, Waste Management, and Environmental Justice and Regulatory Oversight is being reconfigured to include this urgent topic. I'm a professor at the University of Oregon and have been studying environmental justice for over 30 years. I first became interested in the environment growing up in Los Angeles and not being able to see the mountains due to the smog. I still remember the stench and burning in my lungs as a child. More recently, I moved to Oregon because Southern California was simply getting too hot and I suffered from heat sickness. Today, I would like to provide a brief introduction to environmental justice research and highlight what I think are some of the pressing issues faced today. Environmental justice refers to the fact that people of color and low-income populations in both urban and rural areas are disproportionately impacted by environmental hazards. But I really appreciate and agree with what Senator Wicker said. It should be called environmental injustice. Environmental justice is also the name of the movement that has arisen to challenge these problems. Environmental justice traces its origins to the late 1980s. Several key events precipitated it, including protests in rural North Carolina against the dumping of PCB, farm worker struggles against pesticides, Native reservations dealing with uranium waste, urban communities opposed to incinerators, and rural residents lacking access to clean water. In 1987, the United Church of Christ conducted the first national level study of uncontrolled hazardous waste sites and their proximity to various demographic to talk. Since then, environmental justice has had a major impact on the larger environmental movement and society. I would like to now briefly highlight some of the pressing environmental justice challenges that require action. First, cumulative impacts. Cumulative impacts refer to the need to take into account multiple forms of pollution and vulnerability that impact geographic communities. Almost all policy and permitting systems treat polluters individually while disregarding the cumulative impacts of industrial concentrations. This has produced a major mismatch in terms of public health and regulatory policy. For example, near the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, there is an epidemic of childhood asthma, which is due both to the logistics industry as well as individual factories. In California, scholars have developed prototypes to begin considering cumulative impacts. And what these tools do is they enable individuals to identify the multiplicity of risks in a given place. Such tools need to be refined and applied across the country. Number two, climate change and heat. We know that low-income and communities of color are the most vulnerable to climate change. They are vulnerable because they have fewer resources and capacity to respond to heat, cold, drought, and flooding. The end result is higher levels of death and displacement. This past summer in Eastern Oregon, the temperature hit a record 118 degrees. In that particular heat wave episode, 118 people died in Oregon. In urban areas, there are significant differences in heat. Wealthier places tend to have more trees and shade, which led to a 25-degree differential in temperature in parts of Portland. In places like Mississippi, Louisiana, and South Carolina, it is the poorest who are most impacted by hurricanes and flooding, as we saw in Hurricane Katrina, as well as South Carolina in 2015, as well as Senator Wicker's story as well. Exacerbating the situation is recent evidence that FEMA relief is far more likely to go to wealthier residents and homeowners versus low-income populations and renters. Immediate resources need to be directed towards increasing shade, weatherization projects, sheltering the unhoused, and building a more reliant and sustainable energy system. And lastly, water access. As a wealthy country, we assume that access to clean, potable water is not an issue, but that is untrue, especially in rural areas. Sometimes people get disconnected from the utility, such as in Flint in the contamination crisis, but rural communities are disproportionately impacted. For example, the Navajo Reservation, spanning both Arizona and New Mexico, has one of the highest proportions of households without plumbing. In parts of Appalachia, there are communities that have had water boil advisories for over 5 years. These problems require immediate attention and investments in infrastructure to solve the problems. Thank you for your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. We'll have all of our testimony before we go to questions. And next, Catherine Coleman, Flowers.
Thank you, Chair Merkley, Ranking Member Wicker, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify. My name is Catherine Coleman Flowers, and I am a proud native of Lowndes County, Alabama, a rural area located between Selma and Montgomery. Lowndes County has a proud history of fighting for equality and the right to vote. In addition, most of the famous Selma to Montgomery March Trail goes through Lowndes County. It is where, in the early 1900s, sharecroppers organized for jobs and justice. Many of his sons and later his daughters, including my father, 3 brothers, and myself, served in the United States military. We have a deep legacy of holding up core democratic values. I stand on those values, learned as a country girl that grew up with a healthy respect for nature, and I appreciate what our Creator has provided for us, which includes the knowledge to know when we are out of balance with creation. In addition to that, that failure includes, which is what we're seeing today, exemplified through fish kills, more powerful storms, higher groundwater table, sea level rise, heat domes, wildfires, droughts, floods, pollution, straight piping of raw sewage, or failing wastewater treatment systems. I have often taken philanthropists and people from both sides of the aisle like Jeff Sessions, Bernie Sanders, Cory Booker, Doug Jones, and Bob Woodson to Lowndes County to see the infrastructure inequalities and to hear from local people what is needed to address them. At the height of the pandemic, Lowndes County had the highest death and infection rate per capita in the state of Alabama. Declining national life expectancies are a reminder of what happens when poverty, inequality, failing or no sanitation infrastructure, and climate change comes together. The climate crisis impacts all of us. Throughout our nation, we're dealing with failing infrastructure, and it also includes the most basic infrastructure, sanitation. In the town of Hayneville, Alabama, the county seat of Lowndes, for more than 20 years, Ms. Charlie Mae Hawcom has been telling people about the sewage from a nearby lagoon that is backing up into her home. She is paying a wastewater treatment fee, yet all the town can provide is a pump truck to pump the sewage out of her yard from time to time. The failure is more pronounced whenever there is a hard rain. This is indicative of the failing infrastructure and sanitation inequality that exists throughout the United States, whether in Montgomery, Alabama, where many older Black communities are on failing septic tanks, or Martin County, Kentucky, where poor white families are also seeking sanitation and environmental justice, as well as good paying jobs. During a recent visit to the town of Mount Vernon, New York, I met families that have been unable to flush their toilets for more than 20 years. The American Jobs Plan provides an opportunity to deal with the climate crisis head on in forgotten communities. It is a chance to create jobs, to build infrastructure, to create sustainable economic development, and make America a model of ingenuity where we can all have clean air and water in every community. With this funding should come guardrails that will ensure that Mrs. Charlie Mae of Lowndes County or Linda McNeil from Mount Vernon, New York, will no longer get sewage in their yards or homes. Lagoons are not built next to schools, and any sanitation system comes with the same performance and parts warranty we have come to expect from a car, a hot water heater, or a heating and cooling system. I am requesting that you all support investment in resilient infrastructure, including sanitation for all. And I request that we come together and confront this climate crisis and to ensure the future of our children, grandchildren, and 7 generations to come. I thank you for this opportunity to speak before you today, and I look forward to continuing conversation about environmental justice and climate justice for all Americans. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we'll turn to Tracy Harden. Welcome.
Chairman Markley, Ranking Member Wicker, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Tracy Harden. I live in Rolling Fork, Mississippi, and I own and operate Chuck's Dairy Bar. In my testimony, I would like to provide the committee a real-life example of how federal actions or inactions have disproportionately impacted minority and low-income populations. The South Mississippi Delta is one of the poorest areas of the nation. 27% live in poverty, and more than 62% of residents are minorities. Floods, or the preparations for floods, are a constant fixture in our lives. Growing up, I can remember packing every spring and being ready to leave home at any moment if the water would rise. My mother was a school bus driver. When the water would rise, she would have to drive a route on the river levees, hours out of the way to get us to school. But the South Delta flooding of my childhood has been a regular occurrence even now as I see my nieces having to take these long bus rides to school. Unsafe levees. One of the earliest documented South Delta floods was in 1927, after which the federal government assumed responsibility for managing the Mississippi River system and constructing structures, including 22 other pumping plants. Later, Congress expanded the government's responsibility, including in 1941, when it authorized the Yazoo Backwater Project. The Yazoo Backwater Project is comprised of 3 key features: levees along the Yazoo River completed in 1978 that keep the water within the river during high water. The Steel Bayou Gates. The Steel Bayou Gates. The Steel Bayou Gate.
Hold on just a moment. Let's see if we can get a technical fix to that echo. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, if I can go back just a little bit. The Yazoo Backwater Project is comprised of 3 key features: levees along the Yazoo River completed in 1978 that keep the water within the river during high water. The Steel Bayou Gates on the Yazoo completed in 1969 to prevent the Mississippi from flowing backwater into the South Delta. And the final unfinished feature, a set of pumps to pump water over the levee when the gates are closed. This system is interconnected, and without all 3 functioning features, it just doesn't work. My husband Tim and I purchased Chuck's Dairy Bar when our family farm sold in 2006. Chuck's has been in business since 1977, and it is a fixture in Sharkey County, one of the few we have to serve our small community. It's a local hangout for everyone in Rolling Fork. We try to keep our prices low to make sure all of our neighbors, over a third of whom are living below poverty line, feel welcome. However, since we purchased Chuck's in 2007, we have seen 7 of the 12 worst backwater floods on record since the levees were completed in 1978. This year, water rose to almost 92 feet. We also had floods in 2008, 2009, 2016, 2018, 2020, and the worst of all, 2019, when the water devastatingly rose to over 98 feet. The 2019 flood inundated 548,000 acres, 231,000 acres of cropland, and 686 homes. Water was so high, we were fractions of an inch away from losing critical infrastructure, like our sewer systems. We call it the forgotten backwater floods because it received so little national attention despite shattering so many records. Annual flooding has an enormous lasting impact on our region, well beyond folks not being able to frequent my restaurant because they're not making a paycheck. Populations are decreasing, economic opportunity is fleeting, lives and livelihoods are being lost. My friend Anderson Jones has been displaced from his home since 2019. Even though he had federal flood insurance and built 3 levees around his home, each one failed, which highlights the lack of understanding of environmental extremists who advocate alternatives to the pumps. If you can't get to your home because it's surrounded by water, you cannot maintain a levee. And even then, what way is that to live? In 2019, we saw the worst of it. 2 residents even lost their lives in that flood. But unfortunately, the residents of the South Delta know we haven't seen the last of it. What we desperately need to stop the annual flooding in the Yazoo Backwater Basin is the final component of the project. We need the backwater pumps. This project is comprised of and has the support of environmental groups, including the Mississippi Wildlife Federation and the Native Conservancy. In its environmental justice analysis, the Army Corps concluded that the backwater pumps would specifically benefit the community of color. We've been blessed with strong support from our representatives, Congressman Thompson, Senator Hyde-Smith, and of course, Senator Wicker. Thank you. Today, I'm appealing to the rest of Congress and the Biden administration to help fulfill the promise that was made to the people of the South Delta 80 years ago to complete this essential project. Not doing so unfairly impacts people of color and the poor. It is the definition of an environmental injustice, and we need your help to finish the pumps. On behalf of my family, my neighbors, my friends in my community, thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harden. Mr. Rexford.
Good morning. For the record, Delba Jrexford. Chairman Merkley, Ranking Member Wicker, and members of the subcommittee. I am honored to testify before you today. Senator Sullivan, thank you for affording me this opportunity. My name is Delba Jrexford. I am a member of the Inupiat Native Tribe of Barrow. I have lived in the North Slope since August 17th, 1959, when we moved from Kotzebue to Barrow. That is a very, very vivid memory in my mind. I am a shareholder and have been involved with the Opelvik Inupiat Corporation for over 40 years, fighting for the rights of our people and creating opportunities to provide economic, sustainable projects for future generations. I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to provide a unique perspective, a first-hand perspective of the impact federal government activity has had on our environment, our community, our food, our water sources, workforce, and human lives. In 1971, Congress passed the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, better known as ANCSA. Through ANCSA, the federal government agreed to convey to 12 Alaska Native regional and over 200 village corporations 44 million acres of land and compensation of $962.5 million in settlement of Aboriginal land claims of Alaska's Native people in fee simple. I want to emphasize, Alaska Native people gave up 88% of their traditional and customary lands through this settlement. The Inupiat people of the Arctic Slope were the only people who did not support ANCSA. We were fighting for 99,000 square miles of traditional and customary lands, pristine land that sustains our life. We as a people are heavily dependent on subsistence resources consisting of migratory birds, caribou, fish, marine mammals, that sustains our cultural and healthy way of life, that supports our spiritual link to nature. It is our cultural belief and traditional Inupiat value that taking care of our environment and respecting it will continue to sustain our way of life for future generations. Under the terms of ANCSA, Alaska Native corporations are mandated, I repeat, mandated, to provide for the economy, social, and cultural well-being of their shareholders in perpetuity. This means throughout their lifespan. Today, Alaska Native corporations serve over 100 shareholders who have been impacted by contaminants and pollutants that left behind by certain federal agencies throughout decades of occupancy. As detailed in my written testimony, in 1991, Congress also directed the Department of the Interior to submit a report on contaminated lands conveyed through ANCSA. Importantly, the Department of Interior report asserted that ANCs would not be held liable for prior contamination and reinforced the circular law that requires the federal government to clean the abandoned, contaminated properties left behind by federal agencies of the United States. In 1998, Department of Interior agreed to take the leadership role to facilitate the cleanup of ANCSA contaminated lands. A 2016 update proposed that the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation and Environmental Protection Agency oversee cleanup of the sites. This 2016 update also stated that BLM does not, I repeat, does not have the authority to provide liability relief under CERCLA for previous landowners that consisted of federal agencies' occupancy during that period, contaminating the properties. Also detailed in my written testimony is this report, and detail on historical failure of numerous government agencies to accept the leadership role to take the lead to clean up our lands contaminated by the United States government and their agencies. I am here today to share my firsthand knowledge as a lifelong Alaska resident, proudly born in the territory of Alaska, prior to statehood of the state of Alaska. I am proud of that. And I have seen that change over my lifetime. I have grown up on this land. I have hunted, I have fished, I have whaled. And I have also worked the cleanup projects that the government has done over the years on those sites that the federal agency abandoned. This land the federal government contaminated and left behind for future generations, further risking human lives. That causes a little emotion in me. When I was a child, we swam in a lake. Little did we know that there was contaminants disposed of in the lake that contained solid waste, transformers, petroleum products. We were just kids, but we didn't know. We just wanted to have fun in the water. We didn't know the government had contaminated this lake. In 1963, we had a 100-year storm, severely damaging the Department of Navy's 2.5 million gallon fuel bulk farm that went all over what is now the former Naval Arctic Research Facility. Furthermore, there was heavy equipment that was staged, that was pushed into the Elson Lagoon. Hubert Hobson and Morgan Solomon were nearly killed when their boats hit those objects. And lucky today, Mr. Hobson is still with us. And this is just an example of things that we live with. Another example of Department of Defense abandonment of Alaska's North Slope. On occasion, hunters will come across explosive devices left by the military, which are likely decades old and pose a dangerous threat to human life. I'd like to my colleagues and friends in King Cove, Alaska, cumbersome permitting problems have prevented a 12-mile access road from being built that would allow local residents to the only life-saving hospital within 30 miles. And yet people die because they can't get there. People die. Currently, King Cove, residents only access to health care either by air transport or telehealth. Thawing permafrost is revealing solid waste burial sites that were previously unknown. When I walked across the land with Bureau of Land Management and Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, we could smell the diesel, the fuel, and our feet went through the ground, and there was debris under the ground. And this is the kind of contaminants that we're dealing with, that we can't even develop this land. We can't disturb it. According to the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, there are an estimate of approximately 2,400 unknown sites that we don't know of, but they've only documented what are known and reported and documented. As many of you are aware, the presence of PFAS on abandoned military property continues to expose our community to severe public health threats, where our drinking water sources are compromised by surface and subsurface contaminants. Case in point, Imekpak Lake, the drinking water source for the United States Air Force since 1959, and drinking water source for the Barrel Whaling Captains Association and their whaling crews when there's no glacial ice available. That is a contaminated lake now, recently reported with PFAS. Sorry for my emotions. This land that they transferred to my people without complete cleanup and removal of contaminants and debris are a life-threatening condition. This land where we hunt, fish, gather, subsist resources, butcher our whales, which is the most precious activity that we have, are contaminated and needs to be cleaned up. The cost to clean up the contamination is astronomical, but we cannot put a price on the health of families not even on one human life that could be saved. I know for a fact that 80% of a family I personally know, subsistence on contaminated sites from the National Petroleum Reserve of Alaska legacy wells, and 80% of their family passed away from cancer. This is a fact. This is a very devastating fact. ANCs are the largest private landowners in Alaska, but burdensome regulatory permitting challenges impede our environmentally sound economic development plans. We devised a way to get rid of the contaminants with ADEC, but environmental permits didn't allow us to permanently dispose of them in an approved area. It costs millions of dollars to ship them out of Alaska.
Mr. Rexford, can you wrap up your
Yes,
testimony?
in closing, thank you for being patient with me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with each of you today. I am hopeful we can work together to ensure contaminated lands are cleaned up to the benefit of all Americans without threats to human life. Thank you for your patience and understanding.
Great. Thank you very much for both of you providing firsthand testimony of the challenges. I think we'll go to 5-minute rounds of questions. I'll ask people to be, myself included, adhere to that so that we can get in as many folks as possible. Ms. Harden, you cite an article, and I think it's this one, but I wanted to ask. It's called "The Real Damage While FEMA is Denying Disaster to Black Families That Have Lived for Generations in the Deep South." Yeah. The article cites that many families are being denied aid by FEMA because essentially people have inherited properties through generations, but they don't have paperwork to show that it's inherited. I was down in Puerto Rico after the Hurricane Katrina, and this was a terrible problem there. We pushed very hard to have it remedied, and FEMA worked out a fix allowing people to self-certify after enormous pressure. But this article says that FEMA has been unwilling to extend the same fix to the Deep South. And I think that's a part of your testimony that that this results in deeply discriminatory impact on communities of color. And is it your sense that this is something we have to make sure FEMA addresses?
Yes, we definitely do. Just the fact that we've already dealt with the floods. The flood has gone down, and we're trying to get back to some normalcy of life. And, you know, we are a strong community, and we support each other fully, but we in ourselves don't have the funds to help each individual family get back on their feet. And FEMA denying them this because of some paperwork, it makes it even more devastating. We need this help. And it seems that it's continued to be overlooked.
We're having the same problem in Oregon right now for families that were routinely denied help after the devastating Labor Day fires of last year. Families that don't have the same documentation that wealthier families might have. So thank you for pointing that out. And Mr. Rexford, in your testimony, you note that the 2016 report included 3 recommended steps, the first of which is just getting a comprehensive inventory of these, I think, 650 sites so that a plan can be developed. Has that inventory been completed yet?
Not to my knowledge. Again, it's been subject to funding availability according to the federal government.
Yeah. So have any of the sites been cleaned up?
Some of the sites have been cleaned up, but there are still remnants of contaminants and pollutions, in many cases called persistent organic pollutants.
Thank you. And I know dealing with contaminated brownfield sites in my home state, it can be very, very difficult to get those cleaned up. And part of the reason we're holding this hearing is to give voice to these types of challenges. So thank you for sharing your story today. I want to turn to Professor Polito. And Professor, I think we still have you hopefully online. Can you address why certain groups are more impacted by pollution and are more vulnerable to climate change?
Well, there's different reasons depending about which groups we're talking about and what the specific problems are. And I know there's an effort oftentimes just to talk about like disenfranchisement or they're not at the table, but the reasons and purposes really go far deeper than this. As some of the other witnesses testified, there's deep processes of colonization, which are very different, for example, from why a farm worker experiences pesticide exposure and illnesses and death even, right, in California. Or in the cases of around Cancer Alley, the areas around the Mississippi River, like Louisiana, where there's very high levels of oil refining, those are a different set of reasons. And what we have to do, I think, is always be looking at kind of the historical processes of what created these problems. And but we do see the consistency of both different forms of racism as well as exclusion that is happening that are causing the problems. So we can talk about them in broad terms, but there's always very specific ones for each group that we are talking about in terms of both environmental problem as well as in terms of the various population that we're talking about, including, for example, like poor white populations as well.
Thank you very much. And since we're going to stick to the 5 minutes, Senator Wicker.
Well, Drat, that means I have to stick to the 5 minutes. I want to thank our witnesses. Professor Polito helps make my point. She agrees with me we ought to call this environmental injustice. Thank you for that. And also in your her testimony, she says in places like Mississippi, Louisiana, and South Carolina, it is the poorest who are the most impacted by hurricanes and flooding. So I appreciate the professor agreeing with me in that regard. For Ms. Coleman Flowers, it occurs to me, and I think you'll agree, Mrs. Harden, that Sharkey County, where you live, sounds an awful lot like Lowndes County, Alabama, which was described in her testimony.
Yes, sir.
I mean, she mentions fish kills, floods, pollution. That's exactly what we're experiencing and more in Sharkey County, Mississippi. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And I would just note, Mr. Chairman and my fellow senators, that the population loss during the time that this Mississippi Rivers and Tributaries program has been promised has been astounding. In 1940, the population of Sharkey County was 15,000, Mr. Chairman. In 2018, the latest figures I have, just under 4,400 people. The entire population of Sharkey County, it's gone from 15,000 plus to 4,400 plus since 1940, the very time when the residents of the South Delta have been crying out to complete this. Now, Ms. Harden, let's make sure we understand. This was a three-part promise.
Correct.
Levees.
Correct.
The gate at Steel Bayou, and what else?
The pump.
The pumps. And so the federal government, in its wisdom, was able to complete two parts of this, leaving the pumps undone. There'll still be flooding after we have the pumps. It's just that we'll know where the flooding will stop.
Yes.
And there'll be the certainty. Can you elaborate on that, Ms. Harden?
Just a sense of knowing for us, and we do know if those pumps are in, the floods would not be as high. Our farmers would be able to be in the fields working, which means they're able to employ some of the lower income people. If the farmers can't plant, then they can't hire. So it becomes hectic on some other employees, some other businesses to try and make sure that these people working for us, their husbands are working on these farms. We're trying to ensure that if they don't have a job, how do we get more income into their home so that they can still live sufficiently until the flood is gone again?
Thank you for that. And I appreciate Senator Merkley mentioning the problem we have with title to property. I think with large families, without a will, the laws of descent and distribution, sometimes back when I was trying to eke out a living as a small-town lawyer, it's very difficult to find all the heirs. And so I appreciate Senator Merkley's efforts with self-certification there with FEMA. It is fair to say, though, Ms. Harden, that once we get this third leg of the project done, there will be less need for FEMA to come in because the flooding will be in an area where people will know in advance that you shouldn't build there, you shouldn't plant there. If you do, you're assuming the risk.
Because you know, and we have dealt with this all these years, and people say, well, move. This is our home. It's been our home for many years. We can't just up and move. And then a lot of the lower income, how are they going to move?
Right.
They're stuck.
That's been their property for generations.
Exactly.
Let me ask you briefly, because the chair is going to wield that gavel. Would this project benefit or harm wildlife? Would it benefit or harm aquatic species?
It's going to benefit the wildlife. We saw so much devastation in 2019 where you would travel somewhere down the roads and you would see all the dead animals on the side of the road. The deer, the turkeys, just everything. Some turkeys were extinct, some, and it should not be. People saying that this will harm wildlife. Well, all they had to do was come to Rolling Fork, come to the Delta, and look and see how this flooding harmed our wildlife.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Carper.
Thank you. Thank you both. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us today. Tell me where you're from, both of you.
I'm from Rolling Fork, Mississippi.
I would have guessed Boston, but okay. and how about you, sir?
Pardon, sir?
Yeah, where are you from?
Barrow, Alaska, top of the world. As far north as you can go in the United States.
Okay. Who would you say is your favorite senator?
Pardon?
Who's your favorite U.S. senator from Alaska?
Senator?
You got a couple of good ones. Well, let me just say to our chair and ranking member, thanks for convening this hearing today, and we thank both of you for joining us. I think we have a couple of other witnesses apparently are going to come as well. Today, I believe, is the first Senate Environment Public Works Committee hearing in almost 15 years on the subject of environmental justice. First one. And the first since the subcommittee has been renamed to include the words environmental justice in it. But as we all know, this topic and the need for government to address it is far from new. And for decades, minority communities and low-income Americans have shouldered much of the burden from pollution and other environmental problems that impact our nation. It's often hard to illustrate the enormity of a problem such as this, but there's one statistic that stands out in my mind, and that's a report last year that found that 70% of the nation's most environmentally contaminated sites are located within just 1 mile of federally assisted housing. Think about that. 70% of our nation's most contaminated sites are all located within 1 mile of federally assisted housing. That's just one drop in the bucket, one funding of myriad more that all paint the same picture, crystal clear. And we're long overdue for a reckoning here. Yeah. So when we say environmental justice, it's not a buzzword or talking point. Environmental justice means that we have a moral obligation to put justice and fairness at the forefront of all the work that we do. When I talk about environmental justice, I say it's another way of saying golden rule, treat other people the way we want to be treated. But this has to be a top priority for all of us, Democrats, Republicans, Independents. I could speak for myself to say that's certainly the case as I approach our work on this committee, from which I'm privileged to chair, and through the Environmental Justice Caucus, which I co-founded with our colleagues, Senator Duckworth and Senator Booker. So I'm pleased that our committee is leading by example. In April, On committee-led Senate passage of the Bipartisan Drinking Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Act by a margin of 89-2. We don't do many things around here by 89-2, but it's a huge, huge vote. And our legislation makes overdue investments in our nation's water infrastructure so that our most vulnerable communities would have access to reliable, clean water and the means to pay for it. One part of our bill that I'm especially proud of, 40% of the funds in the legislation are designated to go to underserved, rural, and tribal communities, including communities in Alaska. This funding will be crucial in helping disadvantaged communities make necessary upgrades and to ensure families access to clean water and a healthier, brighter future for their kids. And with measures like this, we can start to do right by our neighbors and help those most in need, whether they're neighbors around the street, around the block, across the town, in another community or the county, but those are our neighbors too. Through the American Rescue Plan, we need to set aside $50 million for environmental justice grants. We also set aside some $50 million for environmental justice grants at the EPA and another $50 million to improve air quality monitoring for our communities most threatened by dangerous air pollutants. Now, as this body is in the final sprint working on expansive legislation to invest in our nation's infrastructure and economy, we must keep our focus on this core principle of fairness to fulfill the moral obligation to lift those in greatest need and pursue justice in all that we do. This is especially true when it comes to providing a nurturing environment so critical to livelihoods and prospects for generations to come. We must make sure that we're working to create a better future for all of our neighbors, whether they live, again, in our community or in some other community or across the town. But that's why I'm pleased we're having this hearing and discussion that explores this important issue. We thank you for coming today. Now, a long wind-up for a short question. In your testimony, you mentioned that you wrote a book about how rural communities have traditionally been denied access to sustainable and resilient infrastructure. With natural disasters and extreme weather events on the rise, investing in these communities as well as other communities that have suffered from historic disinvestment will become even more important. Here's the question. How can the federal government help environmental justice communities prepare for climate change and its effect?
Is this for Senator, is this for Ms. Flowers?
This is for Ms. Flowers.
Ms. Flowers is online, and so we'll...
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that question. I think the way the federal government could help environmental justice communities adjust to climate change is to pass the American Jobs Plan. I think that it is a start in making sure that 40% of those investments are going to those communities that are frontline communities that are most overburdened. And I think we've seen some examples of that today with the other witnesses. So I support that effort. I was just in a community where people are dealing with raw sewage running into their homes for over 20 years. But I think this is the first time that I've heard, since I've been doing this work, an effort to try to address this in all of America, but certainly in rural communities.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you for that response, Ms. Flowers. Can I just mention the question for the record, and we'll ask our witnesses just to respond for the record. But the question would be, please tell us more. This is for Mr. Polito, Ms. Polito, Laura Polito. Here's a question. Please tell us more about how threats to water access impact environmental justice communities, especially those in rural areas, and how does this threat compare to the threats from cumulative pollution releases that you mentioned in your testimony? That's my question, and we'll just ask you to respond to the question for the record. Again, our thanks to all of you for testifying today and for holding this hearing and let me participate.
Thank you very much, Chair Carper and now Co-Chair. The microphone is yours.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you all for being here today. You know, in order to support environmental and justice communities, I think it's imperative that rulemaking and permitting processes still allow these communities to have economic opportunities. You've spoken about that. I've supported bills like the Use It Act, which helps to maximize development of carbon capture technology. Those promising technologies are essential to reducing emissions while we're protecting jobs. President Biden has recognized that reducing power sector emissions requires, quote, leveraging the carbon pollution-free energy potential of power plants retrofitted with carbon capture. So, Ms. Flowers, I was surprised when I read the recommendations from the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, of which you were the vice chair, I think. that group stated in their report, quote, that any support for carbon capture, utilization, and storage would harm disadvantaged communities. So I'm asking you, Ms. Flowers, do you personally agree with that recommendation that the administration should stop supporting carbon capture and utilization technology?
Well, first of all, I don't speak on behalf of the WEJAC. I'm here as a private citizen, but I will give you my personal opinion. Okay. My personal opinion is based on my conversations with environmental activists living in communities in California and other places that could potentially deal with carbon capture. They're concerned that carbon capture will harm their communities, and I think that the position of the other folk in the WEJAC that made sure that was there was based on the lived experiences of people who've dealt with carbon capture, who believe that it would do harm. And part of one of the tenets of environmental justice is to do no harm. So, but in my personal opinion, I would like to see air quality monitoring in Cancer Alley and whatever needs to happen to make sure that those plants are either shut down or they're not polluting those communities as they are today. I don't have enough information about carbon capture to be able to make an educated opinion about it. But basically, what I am looking for is whatever kinds of technologies that can make sure that we all have access to clean air and clean water.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The reason I'm interested in this, obviously, is where I'm from. I'm from West Virginia, but the report that came from the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council is different than what the actual administration and Council of Environmental Quality is saying, that CCUS has a critical role to play in decarbonizing the global economy. So I think that's a juxtaposition there of two different positions coming from the same administration. I'd like to know from Ms. Harden and Mr. Rexroad. This is something I've struggled with, again, being a West Virginian, because we have so many people that are heavily impacted by regulations or by new policies that come forward or by the inability to fix the problems. But where my frustration comes from, and I think I hear this from both of you, is that do you actually go to the people that live there who actually, Mr. Rexroad, you said it well in your statement, nobody is going to care for your place, your environment, your property, your part of the world that's so deep in your culture better than you. Nobody knows how to care for that better than you. And so is that a frustration for you that sometimes all these decisions are made and your voice is never heard?
Thank you for the question. We truly believe that at heart we are by nature, by culture, by how we live off the land, we are the best stewards of the land.
Right.
We walk the land, we tent, we fish, we hunt, we trap. All these things bring a spiritual link and a personal link to the land that we care for. That sustains our way of life. And in terms of the rest of Alaska, I truly believe that the 130,000 Native Alaskans share that philosophy of life. And many of them are being directly or indirectly impacted by these contaminants and pollutants.
Thank you. Well, you would believe that West Virginians are right there with you. And I think a lot of people in the country, and Mississippians, the same. Ms. Harden, you mentioned, people say, just leave, just go away. You can't. Right. You can't. You don't want to. It's part of who you are.
And you go out into your community. Well, most of the time, the community comes to us. Yeah. Because our dairy bar is like the center of our town, and you get the farmer coming in and telling you how things are and how hard it's going to be for their life, and then you get the farmer's employees coming in and letting you know how hard it's going to be for their life. And it goes on and on from the top to the bottom. Thanks. I see it all and I hear it all.
Right.
And my job isn't just to be a business owner. My job is to care for these people and take care of these people because they are who takes care of me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Capito. Senator Duckworth is next, joining us online.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Flowers, thank you for your work as a fierce advocate for environmental justice, especially in functional sanitation for communities across the United States. Your testimony has very clearly demonstrated the very urgent need to address our failing infrastructure, especially in sanitation inequality. As chair of the Subcommittee on Fisheries, Wildlife, and Water, I agree and believe that access to clean, safe water is a basic human right, and that it is unacceptable that these very vulnerable communities are impacted by poor water quality and access. You can just look at the town of Centerville, Illinois, to see that oftentimes when these issues occur in neighborhoods of minority or low-income communities, it takes far too long for the public to hear about it or for people to get involved. For decades, we have turned a blind eye to the water issues in this country and failed to provide adequate funding for these systems. My Drinking Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Act would invest over $35 billion federal dollars to assist these vulnerable communities in receiving the funding they need to modernize their drinking water and wastewater infrastructure. I know that this amount of funding will be a great start, but this must be a continuing legacy in order to really make a difference. Ms. Flowers, would you agree that access to safe, reliable drinking water and wastewater is an environmental justice issue?
Yes, Senator Duckworth, it is an environmental justice issue. And clearly, what we saw in Lowndes County, we did a parasite study where we actually collected fecal blood and water and soil samples, and we found evidence of hookworm and other tropical parasites in areas, especially in areas where people are not dealing with proper sanitation. And this is a problem throughout the U.S. And yes, I went to Centerville and actually saw it firsthand. And I'm happy that you're sponsoring this type of fix. And it needs to be a continuous effort because the problems are worse than we even know because there's no central database that documents sanitation issues across the U.S.
Thank you. I think that's a very good point. Do you think that major federal investment in water infrastructure should be a top environmental justice priority?
Yes, because water is life and none of us can live without water. And we have seen what happens when we don't deal with the health consequences of these issues, especially how it impacts the public, because it could very well be that typhoid and all the other kinds of things that comes about as a result of inadequate sanitation could happen again. And COVID has taught us when it comes to the public health that we cannot turn a blind eye to it because we are all impacted by it.
Water is life. You are so right. In Illinois, we have more known lead service lines than any other state in the country. And as you know, there is no known safe blood level for lead in our children. Therefore, these outdated pipes are a threat to our children's health, and this threat is especially higher for minority children. The Drinking Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Act of 2021, which passed the full Senate with 89 votes on the floor, would invest federal dollars into the testing for and replacement of lead pipes. And the president has made it one of his top priorities to fund billions of dollars for the national full lead line replacement. Ms. Polito and Ms. Flowers, do you think the federal government should prioritize billions of federal dollars to remove all of the lead service lines in this country?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I know it sounds like a no-brainer to you and me, but let me tell you, there are others who would argue otherwise. People of color are 1.5 times more likely to live in an area with poor air quality. This can lead to major health problems like asthma, heart attacks, cancer, and reproductive issues. In fact, if you're in Chicago and you go just 10 stops on our rapid transit system, the L from the part of Chicago, the Magnificent Mile, where you have shops selling $1,000 Gucci purses, and you go 10 stops on the L to a black and brown neighborhood, just 10 stops, the life expectancy drops by 18 years, not from gun violence, but from health issues like asthma, heart attacks, cancer. I have been pushing for efforts to increase air monitoring on a hyper-local level. Ms. Polito, to address the infrastructure inequity, would federal implementation of mapping and screening tools help address these shortcomings by identifying the communities that need it most and connect them with policy solutions? Furthermore, what other tools do you think are necessary to ensure the federal infrastructure investments are being discussed get to the correct most vulnerable communities they are intended for?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Yes, we have to begin by simply, having the right data, right? And we don't have that, and it's a problem. It's on multiple levels. Oftentimes we have poor quality data, so that needs to be really improved. A lot of times community scientists and organizations, they do ground truthing to try to verify the data, like is there a pollution source there, and things like that. So improving the quality data is really, really important. Second of all, then, as I said earlier, we need to address like the cumulative impacts, right, versus the individual facility or emitter, which certainly is important, but does not capture like what you're saying is happening on those stops that have, an 18% or 18-year difference in longevity. So that's just the cumulative environment that we're talking about. And we have very limited ability, although I know Illinois is one of the states that has made steps to begin talking about cumulative impacts. So we need to absolutely see that across the board. And this becomes really a very urgent, particularly in cities, in urban areas, more so than many rural areas, although not entirely, that's not the case. And one of the last things that you said is, what else does the federal government need to be doing? Or one of the things that I think is really important is to think about, I frankly feel that in the part of the federal government, as well as many other government agencies, there has been a lack of political will to really go after and enforce the existing environmental laws. I mean, we're not even talking about, people that aren't outside the scope of the law. We can't even enforce the existing laws. We've had cases, for example, in Los Angeles of major polluters such as Exide, which their lead emissions were 50 times over the regulatory limit. It took them decades, and they would not actually solve the problem. They were forced to finally close down, after which then they decided to declare bankruptcy, leaving the entire state of California with the cleanup bill for acres and acres of lead contamination. So there has to be a higher level of political will to actually enforce existing laws.
Thank you. I'm over time, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Thank you very much, Senator Duckworth. We'll turn to Senator Sullivan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think thank you for holding this hearing. I think we already have one unanimous agreement from here, and that's on water and the issues that Senator Duckworth just mentioned. I'll mention in Alaska, and Mr. Jrexford certainly knows this, we have over 30 communities that don't have any running water. No flush toilets, nothing, no running water. They're almost all Alaska Native communities. These are American citizens. I think it's just completely inappropriate. By the way, some of the most patriotic Americans in the country, Alaska Natives, like lower 48 Native Americans, serve at higher rates in the military than any other ethnic group in the country, and yet they don't have water. That's just unacceptable, and I think we all need to work on it. I think there's bipartisan support to do that. Mr. Jrexford, thank you again, sir, for being here, traveling very far for this meeting, and I appreciate you mentioning King Cove in your testimony as well. That's very magnanimous of you to be talking about a Native community that's almost probably 1,000 miles away from your Native community. But it makes the point, and I think it was a really good point. Let me go back to your issue of contaminated lands. And again, for my Senate colleagues here, this is the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, the biggest Native Settlement Act probably in certainly American history, maybe world history, 44 million acres, and yet so much of the land was contaminated. Now, we've made some progress here. We got clarified, thanks to the work of Chairman Carper recently, that the CERCLA liability will not apply to ANCs. Finally clarified that. But, Mr. Jrexford, what other types of assistance do communities such as yours need from the federal government to address this issue? 45 years, almost 50 years, where there has been cleanup by the federal government, which clearly is responsible for cleaning up these contaminated lands. What more assistance and other type of assistance would you recommend?
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. I think in one word, it would be commitment.
Commitment.
Commitment to clean up.
Yeah.
I have a reference docket I have prepared for the committee here in referencing to relative issues that have substance on our continued efforts to work with the Navy on cleanup. But the message is we'll give it to you as is, where it is, and you are liable for cleanup.
Good.
And we cannot live with that. We can't afford it.
Consistent commitment. Your testimony does a really good job at kind of showing how the feds sometimes are engaged, then they're not engaged. So you want consistent commitment to this issue.
Yes, commitment.
Great. Let me ask another question. I mentioned the resource development opportunities. Senator Capito mentioned some of the regulatory issues. Can you tell us how, just one example, the Barrow natural gas field discovery had a very big beneficial impact on your community. Can you speak to that as just one example of how resource development has provided opportunities, provided energy, low-cost energy, and other things in your community that I think a lot of times people just take for granted in the lower 48, but can be very important in Alaska?
Yes, Senator Sullivan and the committee members. As a child growing up, one of my tasks was to get firewood from the beaches or from the landfill in order to heat the home and cook, melt water, etc. And then that escalated to a coal bag I had to put on a sled and take home from the Indian Education Service Barrow Native Co-op store. And that was the process. And then that escalated to heating oil, namely heating oil number one, to put 2.5 gallons into a stove that is on the back of a heater, and you had to be very careful. And that was one of my those were my tasks in our household. One day I went home and 2 or 3 days passed by. I was about 8, 9 years old, and I didn't have to go pick up that fuel oil to heat the house. I said, Mom, are we going to run out of fuel? She said, no, we got natural gas now. This is the benefit that we have now, is that we've got cost-effective natural gas to heat our homes.
Clean burning too, correct?
Yes, yes, and it took years for the Native Village of Barrow and the City of Barrow Council to advocate for it from the federal government. But they did. It took a long time.
Good, thank you.
But it has been resourceful for us in that it has. I'd like to make a comparison right now.
Yes, please.
If you go into the villages, you're going to pay up to $2.50 a gallon or $3.50 a gallon to heat a home for 3 or 4 days. This is reality in the villages. In the 7 outlying villages outside the Barrow, we are fortunate that through negotiations and through advocacy in the 1960s, that we were able to get natural gas hooked up to the community. That made a world of difference. Then we could melt water, we could have showers, and we were fortunate enough. But still, many today don't have that luxury. We call it a luxury because it's taken for granted.
It's a luxury, but people in the lower 48, they don't view it as a luxury. You do, though.
Let me just put it in this analogy. When I woke up in the morning, the water basin would be frozen. That's my analogy of water service that needs to be corrected. For those communities you mentioned earlier, that simple, life-saving water source that is healthy and sanitary.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rexford, I want to follow up on Senator Sullivan's first question about cleanup, specifically regarding, Superfund cleanup. I appreciate the focus in your testimony on the ways that tribes are often left behind in the Superfund cleanup process. Like Alaskan Native corporations, many tribes in Arizona have struggled for decades to compete for funding in the Superfund process. For example, there are more than 500 abandoned uranium mines on the Navajo Nation, and despite years of work, on the part of tribal leaders and repeated commitments from federal leaders to work to clean up these sites. Only 4 sites, only 4 out of 500 are currently undergoing remediation, in large part because for many sites it has been impossible to locate a responsible party with the ability to pay. So, Mr. Rexford, can you expand upon your testimony for why the existing process used by EPA for prioritizing Superfund cleanup sites may put tribes at a disadvantage?
In terms of the Superfund or funding programs for contaminated and pollutant cleanup, either we have to work directly with the Native Villager Barrow or the Inupiat community of the Arctic Slope to receive those funds. Or we can do a partnership with the North Slope borough-wide home rule government. The reason why we're not getting what we need is priorities set by EPA, priorities set by regulation, don't quite get to our villagers. Now, when an accident occurs, that seems to be the time that we get a drop in the bucket. Like the Valley of 10,000 Barrels, someone gets hurt, and then they provide NALM funding. And they were able to clean up in a period of 4 years in 4 summer seasons. Or when we applied for FUDS funding, we didn't qualify because we weren't a tribe. The White Alice sites, the Douline sites that are infested with asbestos, PCBs, and are still on the ground. When EPA and ADEC and BLM called on me to identify the site locations at Camp Lonely, we had to show them map where those locations were. I worked a lot of those sites in my lifetime with the labor union, with the Teamsters. And we need our share of money to clean those up. Now, residuals. In the villages, you can see Shaheen. I'll use Point Hope as an example. At the North Slope Borough Mayor's Office, I was taking the lead on the radioactive isotopes that were left behind by the Atomic Energy Commission of the United States in the 60s. They left the isotopes in the ice, in the body of water that the local people use for water. And it had the highest cancer rates in the nation at the time. The community couldn't understand why everyone was getting sick when they were not being exposed to anything they knew of, physically. And yet, this drinking water source had radioisotopes that the Atomic Energy Commission left buried and said, leave it alone. But Ogotora Creek was a water source for the community. And we have had to bury many of our relatives in Point Hope over the years because of that very fact. That has been noted in reports to the Atomic Energy Commission and the federal government. That's just one example. Now, the Tupahorok site, the National Petroleum Reserve of Alaska site, families subsisted there, and 80% of that family directly died of cancer. Cancer. People of promise, people that were very productive in how we support the community through whaling, through subsistence. 8 of their family members of 12 died from cancer. 8. This is devastating. These are facts that we live with. And we need the money. We would like to be able to clean up the money. Imikpak Lake, that was a water source for the community for decades. The Air Force used it as a water source. The Department of Navy used it as a water source. However, the contaminants from the 1963 100-year flood devastated that water source, and now paths are known to be in there. And so we're putting up signs, do not drink water from Imikpak Lake. After centuries of access to this water source, we are telling our own people, do not drink this water source. So how do you get the money to the impacted community, to the impacted agency that is responsible for that? They want us to sign on a document that says we're going to receive it as is, where it is, and we put the bill of millions of dollars of cleanup. We can't do that. We would deprive our next generation of shareholders opportunities for education, opportunities for health care, and benefits for travel when they need it in emergencies. This is how we put back what little economic profit that we have so that we can continue to support them, especially for those that are needy. My colleague and my peer to my right has very eloquently described the very things that we are faced with in the rural community. We share the same concerns. We have the same problems. But how do you get federal government to say, okay, this is a priority, we've got 3,500 people that are being affected. We've got 8 of 12 people in the family that have died. How do you balance that in the name of cleanup or the loss of a life? I'm passionate about this because they are my people, my community, and I represent them. But I lived with them, I grew up with them, and I've seen them go. Thank you for your question. I do hope I didn't miss your question.
No, you didn't. And, you know, it's apparent that there needs to be, you know, more direct funding where you do not have to apply to, you know, multiple or agencies that the funds need to get to the communities to do this cleanup. And I appreciate your examples. I mean, they're compelling. We have, you know, similar examples all over Arizona that where this cleanup needs to, we've got to do better. I mean, for abandoned uranium mines, I mean, 4 out of 500, it's unacceptable. Well, thank you, Mr. Jrexford.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this very important hearing. Environmental justice populations have been burdened over and over again by pollution, disinvestment, and designed neglect, not benign neglect, designed neglect. And as discussed by Professor Polito, it is critically important to address not just individual sources of pollution, but the cumulative impacts of each alongside socio-economic conditions. In drafting the Environmental Justice Mapping and Data Collection Act, Senator Duckworth and I worked closely with environmental justice advocates to create a framework for a federal method to map these cumulative impacts and ensure that communities that are most at risk from environmental injustices are prioritized as we address the climate crisis. Professor Polito and Ms. Flowers, would you agree that it is important to consult with communities in the process of creating these maps, as well as in addressing any gaps in data that would make it harder to understand and tackle environmental justice issues?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I think, yes, we have to consult those communities. Just to give you a quick example, in a lot of the rural communities, where if you don't go down those dirt roads and know that people are there, they will not be counted. And I think it's very important that the people that are impacted are also part of the data collection, because that's why we have so many gaps.
Beautiful. Thank you. Ms. Flowers?
I would agree with that. I think it's really essential. One of the things that we've seen, I haven't seen the federal model or what you're hoping to, what it will look like, but I know in cases like at the Cal EJ screen, which has been one prototype that has been developed, when they go and involve local community members, they can point out sensitive land uses that would also impact how we understand cumulative impacts. So for example, is there a child care center there? Or is there like an elder care facility there, or schools? Those all have big differences. So it is very essential for this to happen.
Thank you. And to both of you, again, would dedicated funding for community engagement, cumulative impact mapping, and data collection make it easier to prioritize and properly value communities' contributions to these efforts?
Yes.
Yes, I agree.
Excellent. Professor Polito highlighted in her testimony extreme heat is an environmental justice issue, even within the same city, due in part to historic redlining and differences in tree cover. Some neighborhoods, often lower income communities or communities of color, can be up to 20 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. Despite the fact that most heat-related deaths and illnesses are preventable, extreme heat events kill more Americans than any other weather event. As the old saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and that's why I will soon be reintroducing my Preventing Heat Illness and Deaths Act to strengthen interagency efforts to address extreme heat and provide financial assistance for projects that reduce the health impact of extreme heat events such as urban tree plantings, cool roofs and streets, and cooling centers. Climate change is only going to worsen the extreme heat crisis. We need prevention now. Professor Polito and Ms. Flowers, would you agree that additional investment in extreme heat prevention could help address historic inequities and prevent and protect public health?
Absolutely. It is urgently needed. People are dying.
Again, Senator, I concur that this is definitely needed. Yes.
Yeah, thank you both for that. And finally, in the grips of a respiratory pandemic, healthy air shouldn't even be determined by zip code, but even within a single neighborhood, air quality can vary up to 800%. We can't manage what we don't measure, and federal funding levels for air quality support have remained unchanged for nearly 2 decades, which is unbelievable. And that's why I'm working on legislation that provides grant and contract funding for hyper-local air quality monitoring in environmental justice communities. Professor Polito and Ms. Flowers, would you agree that it is important for us to be able to identify, communicate about, and finally work to resolve air pollution hotspots all across our country?
Yes, I would agree. Absolutely.
Yes, I also agree, and I think that the people in Cancer Alley would welcome that.
Yeah, and again, Cancer Alley is just one example that has proliferated across our entire country. It's just time for us to have environmental justice at the core of any piece of legislation which we pass this year, because if you don't map it, it's impossible then to rectify the historic injustices. So thank you both for your work historically, and thanks to both of our panelists as well. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for conducting this hearing.
Thank you, Senator Markey. And we're going to have a second round in which each senator is allowed one question. And so if you'd like to stay and you have something else you'd like to, I know Senator Sullivan has a question, and I understand Senator Wicker might return for an additional question. So my additional question goes to you, Ms. Flowers, and you refer in your testimony to Cancer Alley along the Mississippi River, and where residents combat very high cancer rates due to pollution. What is the source of that pollution that is affecting residents in Cancer Alley?
Thank you for that question, Senator. I had the opportunity to visit Cancer Alley and was taken on a tour through the communities and meeting with community people led by retired General Russell Honore. And the way I was shocked by what I saw is almost like a Disneyland of petrochemical plants sitting along the Mississippi River. And even though I was only there for several hours, I myself had respiratory issues once I left there. That it took me, I had to really go to bed for about a week trying to figure out what was going on with me. And to me, it made me feel that it's really even harder for people that have to live there. And these plants are located next to homes, they're located next to schools. And the people have been crying out for the longest about getting air quality monitors there so that they can monitor what's there and be able to show the correlation between what is being emitted in the area and the illnesses that they are dealing with. So that is so needed, and Cancer L is just one example, as you stated earlier. But clearly we have to use that maybe as an example of how we get local people involved and be able to monitor and track what is happening there.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And I'll just note that one of the side effects of natural gas is climate change that is driving the tremendous fires out in Oregon, but another side effect is natural gas is the feedstock for the petrochemical industry making plastics and results in very high cancer rates for those who are located nearby. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to raise an issue that I've raised a number of times in this committee. You know, the Biden administration stated focus, I don't know if you can bring over here a little bit more, on racial equity and environmental justice, in my view, has not fully considered the welfare of Alaska Natives, which are certainly our biggest minority group in Alaska, who have seen great advances in life expectancy because of the opportunities and health benefits of resource development. So this is a chart that shows, that's from an American Medical Association study on changes in life expectancy in America from 1980 to 2014. The dark blue and purple are the biggest increases, up to 13 years, and the yellow and red are actually, unfortunately for our country, decreases. That's a lot of where the opioid epidemic has hit communities very hard. But Alaska had the highest life expectancy increases of any place in the country, by far. And the reason is twofold. One is, unfortunately, the Alaska Native people had a very low life expectancy to begin with, but resource development started happening on the North Slope, the Northwest Arctic Borough, the Aleutian Island chain, and I'm worried that as this administration starts to focus on shutting down those opportunities in our rural communities, that these incredible advances, 13-year life expectancy increases, I don't think there's anything more important than that in terms of an indicator of policy success than are the people you represent living longer. And in Alaska, they're living longer because of these opportunities. I'm worried that we're going to go backwards in this important area if this administration focuses on shutting down resource development opportunities in our state, particularly the rural areas. Mr. Jrexford, you have a lot of experience with this general issue, seeing life expectancies increase, economic opportunity that comes with resource development. Would you like to comment on this? And do you have concerns that if these opportunities are shut down, we're going to be going backwards?
Yes, thank you, Senator Sullivan, committee members. In my entire lifetime, my father was with a Teamsters Union and worked resource development, going to remote sites for 6 months out of the year and come home through Arctic Constructors and USGS, seeking oil and gas exploration so that we can have resources to develop. And then he was there during the discovery of the pipeline at Parson Camp in Dead Horse in Prudhoe Bay. I worked the pipeline. There was a benefit to economic jobs. And also the state of Alaska enjoyed the royalties that allowed us to get, in some cases, basic services, water, wastewater treatment. And yet today, there are struggles. The benefits that I have directly seen since 1974, in my short lifetime after graduating from high school in 1973, is our ability to tax oil and gas properties. We don't have a royalty. Don't get me wrong. We don't have royalty, but we had to file a lawsuit so that we could generate revenue to build roads, to build health clinics, to build fire stations, to build airports. high school and junior high facilities, every program and service, behavioral health that comes with infrastructure needs. That is basically just from the ad valorem tax of approximately 2.5%, 1.8 to 2.5% annually. That helps support it, provide economic jobs, safe water, health clinics so that we can get better health care and detect illnesses before it went too bad. Now, when we talk about the 8 villages, Barrow being the hub, and the 8 villages are still struggling because infrastructure is now 45, 50 years old. We continue to upgrade them with what little money that we have to keep them going to continue the level of services. But these are the benefits that we have received. The subsidy of heating oil to the villages is very crucial, especially in the economically depressed zone in several of the villages that have no economy. But there's the North Slope Borough, the native villages, the tribes, and the city that provide minimal job opportunities. They have to go outside of the community to support their families, to provide for their families. Otherwise, it's welfare. And we are not a welfare-driven community. No. We like to be industrial. We like to be productive and give back with our own, with our dignity, with our self-respect, in the name of a job and employment.
Thank you.
And that's what we seek.
Very powerful. Best government program is a good job. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To any of our witnesses, President Biden's plan for job creation is to have 40% of the programs of the revenues go towards communities that are environmental justice communities. What, in your opinion, is the best way to ensure that 40% of all of the funding goes into those communities? What would you like to see put in place in order to accomplish that goal?
Do we want to direct that in order? Perhaps Ms. Harden, you're ready to speak to that? Go ahead.
Okay. The money is great, and it's needed. But what we need to see in the Delta are the pumps, because without those pumps...
I say, are the what?
The pumps, the backwater pumps. We need those pumps put in. Without those pumps, we're not able to have many job opportunities. The businesses are closing. People are moving. And we need to be able to keep the people there. So with us getting those backwater pumps, that money would be greatly needed in our area. But we need the pumps before.
Great.
Thank you.
Very helpful. Yes. Mr. Rexford.
Yes, Senator Markey, my ears are ringing. Would you repeat the question so I can understand it?
Yeah, President Biden intends on 40% of all the funding in his Jobs Creation Act to go to environmental justice communities. What's the best way to ensure that that money gets to those communities?
In order to have direct access to those communities, we need to have a entity that will receive them, administer and implement the programs intended for. Now, if there are provisions in there of that funding, how is it going to filter down and put back into the community and sustain it? That's the question, is can we sustain, after the funding is available, to sustain the program to future generations? In all due respect, the sunshine state of Florida has a lot of sun, but 6 months out of the year, we nearly have none. So polar energy, solar energy is limited. And so what type of program would generate, what kind of infrastructure would generate sustainability? And that would be a goal that we could set. This will definitely be sustainable for future generations and yet reduce the ability to maintain and operate it to a minimum, that it sustains itself. I do hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Rexford. And if you could, my time is about to expire. Professor Polito, Ms. Flowers, would you have any quick insights that you would like to give to the committee as to how to make sure that funding does go to environmental justice communities?
Well, first of all, we should have a scorecard to make sure that it does, in fact, go to those communities, and guardrails should be put in place to make sure that the business opportunities that are created will be created for people that live in those communities as well.
Beautiful, great. And Ms. Flowers.
One of the things that I would say is by working directly with already existing community organizations, groups doing like environmental justice work, that would be a real good kind of conduit. Groups that are oftentimes already doing like weatherization projects and things like that.
Beautiful, thank you. And thank you all for your contributions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Markey, and to my colleagues for their variety of questions exploring this issue of economic justice and economic injustice. There was a gathering back in 1991, and this gathering was a significant landmark in the national discussion about environmental justice. There was a 4-day summit attended by over 1,000 individuals from all 50 states. It was sponsored by the Commission for Racial Justice in the United Church of Christ. And out of that came a set of 4 principles for environmental justice that have continued to reverberate through the last 3 decades. One is that public policy must be based on mutual respect and justice for all people. Second, that the environmental justice communities have the right to participate as equal partners in decision-making, including needs assessment, implementation, enforcement, and evaluation. That's the seat at the table. The third is the use of land and renewable resources must be ethical, balanced, and responsible in the interest of a sustainable planet for both humans and other living things. And fourth, it's important to consider the cumulative impact of every source of pollution in a community rather than looking at each source in isolation. So I wanted to close with those thoughts as I'm sure we'll be continuing the conversation about environmental justice. It's so important to make sure that we do. And so now some thank you, Professor Polito, Ms. Coleman Flowers, Ms. Harden, Mr. Jrexford, for your contributions based on the experiences and knowledge you've accumulated through a lifetime. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a number of reports and articles related to today's hearing. Hearing no objection, thank you. Additionally, senators will be allowed to submit questions for the record through the close of business on August 5th. We will compile those questions, we'll send them out to our witnesses and ask our witnesses to reply by August 19th. So if we have questions for you all, in addition from other members or members who are here today, we'll get those to you, and we'd appreciate you sending us answers back that we'll make part of the record. And with that, the hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.